The very sadly missed James Joseph Croce, one of Philadelphia's native musical sons, gone far too soon. Like many of his contemporaries, Jim had his beginnings in the coffeehouse circuit of folk music in the 1960s. But seeing little success in this lifestyle of the traveling musician convinced him and his wife Ingrid to move to rural Pennsylvania, not even 2 hours from where I sit right now. Situations he found himself in and characters he met along the way, working straight jobs as a non-musician, found their way into his lyrics and made some of his best songs possible. Jim had a real knack for taking stories that he had heard from other people and places that he had been and turning them into catchy songs that everybody could relate to and enjoy. When you look at Jim's entry on the Songwriters Hall of Fame page, it states that in a span of 10 days after he decided to really get serious about writing music and get back into the business, he penned the hits Operator, You Don't Mess Around with Jim, Photographs and Memories, and Time in a Bottle. That's not too bad. It seems that with the proper motivation, he had finally cracked the code and wrote great songs for the rest of his tragically too short life, dying in a plane crash at the age of 30 in 1973. And more personally, my dad loved Jim Croce. The memories I have of my dad playing this record, and I do mean this record, this was his. There's an extra special shared dimension to this if you've ever had a chance to hear Jim Croce live in concert. I have a bootleg called The Final Tour in 1973, an old FLAC file I found online years ago, and it's of his last show, and he's in great spirits and sharing jokes with the crowd who appreciate everything that they're hearing from him, especially the music. Of special note for this show as well is the inclusion of the song made from the poem by Robert Burns called The Ball of Kermere. And please do find a way to listen to that song if you get the chance. It's awesome. That also leads me to another thing I'm thinking about is how horrible record store day releases have been for the last few years. I mean, there's a couple of good ones each time, but there's rarely more than 3 to 5 that I really care about. There has to be a treasure trove of Jim Croce live material, and that particular live 1973 show would fill an album out and would make a lot of collectors very happy. Just a suggestion. I doubt they'll listen though. But if they do listen, I'll buy it. Shit, I'll buy 2. I have no real favorite songs on this album. I love it up and down. The only thing that I think I could say as a critique would be that it doesn't have a certain number of other songs that I would like to have on this album. So, here again, Record Store Day. Jim Croce, Photographs and Memories, remastered and expanded 2 LP. 45 RPM if you want. I'm not particular. This sonic time capsule, released more than 5 years after the band broke up, serves well to capture them in their heyday and how great they sounded together. On here, though, we find our favorite Northampton lads recordings in chronological order for the BBC. Daniel Ash's fuzzy guitar licks and choruses full of incredible sonic textures always struck me as being kind of cinematic. You would listen to Bauhaus, Love and Rockets, and Tones on Tail, and the music was dark, and it was loud, and it was gorgeous. I've always believed that a band's choices of cover songs will tell you a lot about who they are and what they're capable of musically. The cover of David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust here is rightly praised and cherished, but also there's The Third Uncle from Brian Eno and Telegram Sam from Mark Bolan and T-Rex. Those are top choices if you're going to be a band that I care about. Oingo Boingo Alive, 1988. With this legendary album, Oingo Boingo did something that I wish a lot of my other favorite bands would have done as well. They got together to record their songs live, the way they play them in concert. The idea itself is such a brilliant conceit. I wish that other bands would have taken note. Sadly, as far as I know, the only other band that even attempted something like this was The Police in 1986. They intended to get together and re-record their hits, but all we have is the immortal Don't Stand So Close to Me 86, which stands as a testament to that time in the studio. Their typical strife broke them apart, but at least we have that one song. Growing up in Southern California, myself, Oingo Boingo was kind of unavoidable in a way that a local band can be. They were always playing locally, and it never seemed to be too far away from the next Oingo Boingo concert. At the time of their popularity, I was really more into hip-hop, and I kind of avoided listening to them, but I did like the single for Weird Science, and I did see them in Rodney Dangerfield's Back to School, and they certainly looked like they were having a lot of fun. Typically, it was something I caught on to pretty late. It was about 1988, 89, by the time I actually sat down and listened to them, and this record certainly helped. Also, sadly, in my lateness to becoming a fan of this band, I didn't get the chance to see them live in concert, so this is as close as I'm ever going to come. I do regret missing so many chances because they were playing pretty regularly around Southern California for a long time. And because of that lateness to becoming a fan of the band, I actually do prefer all the versions on this record to their counterparts on the original studio albums. I know it's blasphemy to anybody who's been a fan longer than I have. That's what it is, though. And I also would like to give my heartfelt thanks to Rebellion for releasing all the remasters of the Boingo catalog over the last year or two. I bought multiples of every single one, shared them with my friends and family. It's a beautiful thing, and if there are any left, you should go get them. I think some of them are on their second and third pressings, and I doubt there'll be many more, so don't miss out. I also like to imagine what would happen if this same thing had been done by bands like The Cure, Depeche Mode, maybe the Smiths if they could have gotten together for a little bit. Damn, this glare is something. The Police, Every Breath You Take, the singles, 1986. Yeah, it's obvious I'm a child of that time, so a lot of these records are going to be around that era. Obviously a band needing very little reintroduction from me. But this record, though, I really believe this one has been slept on for a number of years. At least that's my excuse for buying so many copies of it. For reasons inexplicable to myself, I often see this record for about $10 to $12 at record conventions and shows, and I scoop it up each time because it's too good. It also figures I'd buy so many because ostensibly I'd be giving them to friends or new fans of the band, and then we go and move somewhere where I know absolutely nobody. So they're kind of gathering dust. But as is all too often the case with wildly successful bands, internal strife did separate them, and they eventually, quietly, broke up. And the smartest thing they ever did was they broke up, but did not tell anybody. They just went on one of the longest hiatuses in the history of rock and roll music, only to regroup again in after about 20 years for some live shows. There is not one song on here that is not a stone cold Police classic. And as always, I appreciate the chronological order of these things because I love to watch the growth of a band. I can't really pick a favorite, and if you can, then I wonder if you aren't listening hard enough to the rest of them. But do yourself a favor and get this one if you can. Like I said, it's pretty cheap. Sting, stang, stung. Man, this thing is going to be rife with so many honorable mentions. It's going to be ridiculous. I should have made this 20 or 30 instead of 10. Bad Religion, all ages, 1995. This is a wonderful collection of the best of the Epitaph tracks and a couple of live joints. And of course, as a hardcore fan, I believe that this album is not nearly long enough, but I cherish it nonetheless. This pretty much contains the best known tracks up to about 1995 from the band. As a tremendous fan of the band, I would eventually love to see this expanded into maybe a 4 LP set that contains the post-1995 tracks. They've done so many incredible albums since this has been released. And in my estimation, Bad Religion has always inhabited the best two hemispheres of punk rock and what makes it so good. In the first sense of the hemispheres, each song is loud and fast and played incredibly well. And secondly, the incendiary and incredibly intelligent lyrics always reward the type of us who are liner note readers for lyrics. And as a sad consequence of them going from Epitaph to Atlantic Records in 1993, this doesn't contain any of the glorious Recipe for Hate songs that we all know and love. Just weeks before finding out that this album was even going to be released, I was still actively searching for good prices on the imports for these EPs. And if anyone is a Ride collector, you'll know that these things are not cheap on vinyl and are almost impossible to find in the States. For those unaware, Ride were shoegaze stalwarts of the Creation label from the 1990s, with many hits and a massive popularity in their native England, but relatively unheard of in America, from what I found out, because everybody I talked to about them has no idea what the hell I'm talking about. Vapor Trail was the first song that I heard from this band, and immediately I became a very obsessive fan. The song is so perfect, and I've probably listened to it a few thousand times by now. Hell, I might just do it again in a few minutes now that I think about it. Also of note are Today, a beautiful song, Dreams Burned Down, All I Can See, Like a Daydream, Perfect Time, Nowhere, Unfamiliar, Drive Blind. Hell, it's all really good, especially if you're into shoegazy guitar. But obviously it's so much more than that. It's very complex and very enjoyable, and I think you should really give it a try. I mean, and look at that. And I want that as a poster. Fresh Jams, 1985. Right here, this is my favorite Golden Age sampler. This has everybody who mattered in 1984 and 85 to me. Run DMC, the Fat Boys, UTFO, Tila Rock, Curtis Blow. It's only 8 songs in its entirety, but it hits really hard. And you can, if you find them, you can find them for less than $10. It's insane how cheap these things still are. But they are hard to find in the wild. And very few things in 1985 in my life mattered more to me than Run DMC. So it was very important to see them well represented on this compilation as well. And I don't care what anybody says. The first singles and the first album by the Fat Boys are hip-hop classics. If you know, you do know. The Cure, Standing on a Beach, the singles, 1986. The obvious favorites and classics are on this one, from even the casual fan to the hardcore fan. I mean, it begins with Killing an Arab and Boys Don't Cry. It's hard to start off an album compilation or otherwise, any better than that. Giving proof that one should never doubt Robert Smith's ability to write a catchy tune. Find Enclosed, Close to Me, In Between Days, The Love Cats, Let's Go to Bed, The Caterpillar. I've very often made the comparison between Robert Smith and David Bowie, and that they're both incredibly talented musicians and songwriters that happen to enjoy writing obscure, great, but obscure music most often. But they know exactly how to write a pop hit whenever they want to. Man, I'm always up for talking about this one whenever I get the chance. All of This and Nothing from the Psychedelic Furs, 1988. Woefully all too often included when people who don't know a lot about music will talk about one-hit wonders. You'll find the Psychedelic Furs involved in the conversation. The Furs never did release a bad album at all, and each single was hidden. And as usual, most people can only talk about Pretty in Pink, which, although overplayed and well known even by people who don't know the band, is still an incredibly awesome song. Heartbreak Beat, Heaven, President Gas, Imitation of Christ, just a few of the best cuts on this one. Also criminally undervalued, so if you can, pick yourself up a copy. I've got a few. The Descendants, Summary, 1991. And again, I'm sure another non-surprise from somebody who grew up in Southern California in the 70s and 80s. And now the Descendants seem kind of obvious, but there were many of us for years who were screaming at the rooftops about how you need to listen to this band. And oddly enough, I find myself agreeing with Fat Mike in the Descendants documentary about if Milo Goes to College had come out around the time of Dookie by Green Day, the Descendants would have sold 10 million copies of that record easily. And oh man, I can't be expected to pick 1, 2, 5, 10, or even 15 favorite songs from this joint. It's just too good. Ugh. Okay, really, I'm going to go through a quick list of honorable mentions and just flash them up whenever I can. Bob Marley and the Wailers, Talkin' Blues, live at K-San, 1973. And this beauty from 1977, various artists, The Sound of Philadelphia. The OJs, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. You know that means Teddy Pendergrass. Lou Rawls. Man, I can't even get my voice that deep. And also with a great inclusion of the MFSB, the Mother, Father, Sister, Brothers band from Philadelphia International Records that played almost all the hits so excellently. Sisters of Mercy, A Slight Case of Overbombing. Yeah, I know it's the greatest hits. I just like holding it and listening to it. Is there anything else to say? This one needs its own video. Tyler Childers, live at Red Barn Radio, Volumes 1 and 2, 2018. And I'm filming these while my wife is out getting her hair done because she normally works from home now, and I don't want to have her sit upstairs on a phone call listening to me talk records downstairs. I think she gets enough of that in her daily life. Trust me, she hears plenty.